So our first speaker of the entire conference is Dennis Dawson, and he's a man of many, many talents. 40 years in high-tech training and documentation, a distinguished Toastmaster. I imagine that means that when he eats a piece of toast, he has his pinkies up. I know that's not true. Please don't message me. And if you see the amazing sketch notes that we have that go up on social media about all of our talks, he's the one who does them, and you'll be able to see him working his magic over at his table. He's also played Santa Claus at Christmas in the Park, and was an elephant's rear end and a horse's rear end in Disneyland Christmas parades. Unfortunately, he's not dressed like that today, but he'll be up here to tell us about graphic relief beyond flowcharts and screenshots. So please give a warm welcome to Dennis Dawson.
There we go. Oh my goodness, look at all of you out there. I remember when I first came to write the docs. It was back in the spring of 23. I was just a wide-eyed kid full of dreams. And I saw people on the stage. I said, you know, when I get bigger, I want to be on that stage. And here I am a year later. So dreamers out there, clutch to those dreams. They can come true. But today, I want to talk about how my attendance last year has influenced my work over the past year and made some opportunities for very necessary changes in our docs. A little tease here. I will cover the transformations that we achieved this past year. I'll talk about the tutorials I've created to make our material more accessible to users at all levels. I will talk about the tools that I used to create our docs, cheap, how we tested the docs to be certain that they were having the desired effect, and finally, some tips I've garnered over the years of working to improve documentation sets. Now, 2.5 years ago, I joined Ripple, a cryptocurrency company, solutions provider. All I knew about cryptocurrency is that it's used on the black market for shady dealings. Now, the first week I was there, I saw a John Oliver quote, "Cryptocurrency, everything you don't know about money combined with everything you don't understand about computers." That's exactly how I felt. 40 years in high tech, and I was essentially starting all over again in a new realm. Now, naturally, I tried to follow the same advice I give everybody, RTFM. Big mistake. I tried to read our existing documentation. That did not work out very well at all. I was confronted with this big gray wall of text. It had so many links, I always thought I was on the wrong page. And while our docs were thorough, I found them dense, detailed, difficult to parse. I repeatedly asked myself, why are you telling me this? And why are you telling me this now? Do I need to know all of this in order to get started? You see, the writers somehow forgot a basic truth about technical writing. Nobody wants to read it. You have to think not just as an author, but as a consumer in order to succeed. Customers only want to read just enough to perform their jobs, no more and probably less. Now, I'm old enough, obviously, that I don't blame myself if I can't absorb documentation. Our docs needed reorganization, better navigation, and a lighter touch overall. Oh, and as an aside, I am a huge fan of Stephen Pressfield's book. Everybody? Yeah, definitely The War of Art. If you haven't read it, you must. So I gave up, like any rational adult. Rather than slog my way through the documentation, I just started using the software, and I was using sample code and verbal support for our engineers. And before long, I started to figure things out, and it wasn't that complicated at all. I kept track of what I learned, and I wrote it in digestible form so that I could refer back to it. Then I shared the link with other noobs as they joined. I got feedback that helped me to improve the content. Now, everyone told me how much they appreciated the simple breakdown. "Publish it," they said. But while my users claimed they loved my drawings, they were concerned that other people might not get them. They didn't fit our corporate style. So I engaged with our design team. Now, generally, I shy away from designers because my drawings have a particular je ne sais quoi. It's a sense of whimsy that corporate diagrams lack. Most designers think of bean bodies as being cool and creative. But I was fortunate to be paired with Ellen Yang and Natalia Sabatari, both of whom got it. They knew how to translate my illustrations to work with our corporate look. They provided plenty of alternative ideas. It was a very creative back and forth to find just the right look. We finally settled on sort of a neon look. Natalia did a great job of capturing a lighthearted vibe while sticking with our corporate color guidelines. Now, the result is a great-looking set of elements that I can reuse and manipulate to create illustrations throughout the documentation. Armed with these resources, we moved forward with improvements. So what are these mind-blowing transformations we made to our documentation this past year? Well, we'd already made progress when my manager and I attended Write the Docs last year. We were blown away by the quality of the talks and how pertinent they were to what we were doing. Ryan Young, somewhere in the audience here, I hope, he talked about thinking in layers, in particular, that middle layer that we were lacking, the decision layer. His description crystallized what we were trying to accomplish. Now, I always feel the need to justify my illustrations and examples. Caitlin Davies' presentation about effective visuals described some of the fixes I had already made to our graphics. She recommended Richard Mayer's book, Multimedia Learning. You must read it. Reading that book gave me the vocabulary to explain why I was making the changes and gave scientific data to objectively justify them. I also learned that I was doing some things wrong, and I was able to fix them before we went live. Now, folks, you're going to hear so many great ideas from the presentations you see here at Write the Docs. You can use the information presented here as justification for the improvements you know you want to make. Take good notes and catch the presenters in the hall or at the unconference. I guarantee you it really paid off for me. So here's what we actually did to improve the quality of our documentation. For starters, we added navigation cards to the main and sectional landing pages to help guide the users to the section most pertinent to what they're doing. We did add my new introduction to explain the high-level concepts without getting bogged down in the details. We used lots of illustrations and white space to make it a pleasure to scan and easy to grok. While the graphics are whimsical, they're also metaphorical, and they're consistent in their meaning. They help to explain each concept at a glance as the reader builds familiarity with the concepts. Our new use cases serve as that decision layer that Ryan Young described. These topics describe practical steps to implement a feature with a "Do you want to know more?" link at the end of every paragraph. There's just enough text to give the reader the gist of each topic so they can decide whether they need to dig deeper. Now, our existing tutorials had a serious flaw. They combined descriptions of usage with development tasks. They reminded me of a product I encountered very early in my career. In 1988, Claris was developing Smart Form Designer, software to design forms so that they could be used for automatic data collection. Now, we fill out forms every day, but back then this was exciting stuff. Claris was a client of my company, Arthur Young. I worked there in computer support. My boss handed me the software and said, "Hey, why don't you try using this for the new inventory process?" Something we'd already defined. Now, the product let you draw each field, then it immediately snapped you over to another window to program the logic for the value. After half an hour, I had a pounding headache. I told my boss, he said, I did too. He arranged a meeting with the product manager where we could give our feedback. The PM was a bit smug, "Oh no," and told us we were crazy. That they had many beta testers, they played with it, and they loved it. Well, my boss excused himself to go to the restroom. Bill Campbell, the CEO, happened to be there at the same time. He knew Chris and expressed surprise that he was there. What are you doing here at Claris? Chris told him about our concerns about the interface of the company's big new product. Now, to make a long story short, the product manager was reassigned. The product was redesigned, and it was released about 6 months late with a greatly improved interface. Now, there are many takeaways from that story about how business gets done, but the most important for me was the debilitating effect of context switching. Continually going back and forth between form design and programming required constant changes in context, resulting in the headaches we suffered. Our tutorials had users reading about a concept, then they'd be looking at the sample code like a developer, then they tried it out like a user. Every paragraph in our tutorials had them switching back and forth between wearing that developer hat and the user hat. I knew this was a problem, and I knew a solution. See, back when I worked at Oracle, everything happened a long time ago, that's all I'll tell you. My manager tasked me with finding a freelance writer who would write an O'Reilly book about our product. We just assumed that our Oracle docs would be comprehensive, they'd cover all the product features, but real programmers like O'Reilly books. So I asked him, why can't we just write our books like O'Reilly books? And I did. And that's pretty much what I've been doing ever since. Because O'Reilly figured out a long time ago there are two things that developers really want: runnable sample code and complete API documentation. Conceptual documentation, use cases are great, but developers mostly want the code and the parameters they need to customize it. So our new tutorials have a modular design. Each lesson builds on previous examples to introduce methods that present a new use case. They're meant to be sequential, but you can start with any module at any time and everything's going to run fine. The user interface is isolated from the business logic. So developers could copy the self-contained best practices methods from these modular files, paste that business code directly into their own applications with no need for modification. Now, our videos give demos of the user experience and they animate what happens behind the scenes. Customers can see the software in action without having to download and run the program themselves. So here's an example.
Hi, I'm Dennis Dawson. Let's try interacting with the XRP ledger. Click Get New Standby Account, then click Get New Operational Account. First, the scripts connect to the XRP ledger. Once the connection is established, each script sends a request for a new wallet and waits for the result. The faucet on testnet funds the account with 10,000 Play Money XRP, then returns the wallet with several fields of useful metadata.
So as you can see, in the interface, you click a button and you get a new wallet. The animation lets me show what's happening in the background from a developer's perspective. One caveat though, people say, oh, let's make videos. Well, don't make a video showing somebody typing and then running code. It's dull, it's ineffective. What you want to do is let people read the code in text, in your docs, and the inline commentary is a much better experience when you're learning how to code. Now, the flowcharts in our docs were accurate, but they required explanation. The whole point of a graphic, in my mind, is to present information at a glance. Some graphics, like this one, required a long paragraph of description for each of the 4 levels. The reader would need to scroll back and forth or open docs in 2 windows in order to make sense of it. So I revised the topic and built the chart one section at a time, keeping the text in closer proximity to each section. There's no reason we can't use builds in docs the same way you might do it in a slideshow or video. Back in the day, we might worry about printing costs and all that colored ink. But since our docs are only online, we don't have to worry about including more graphics if they lend clarity to the topic. When the flowchart's complete, each section makes sense to the reader, and it's easier to grok the entire image. Now you're asking, Dennis, Dawson, how do you do this? What do you use? What are the tools that you employ to create your documentation? The short answer is the cheapest and simplest tools required to do the job. I do my first drafts in Google Docs. It's a convenient platform for collaboration with engineers and product managers. We can ask questions, make comments, edits together. I remind the engineers that I believe their writing is every bit as good as my programming. That helps to keep us both humble. So we keep things in Google Docs until we think we have a draft that's ready to review. When we're satisfied with the draft, we use the Docs to Markdown extension to do the raw conversion. The output is really pretty good, just requires a little touch-up here and there. Once things go to Markdown, reviewers mark up the pull request in GitHub. With few exceptions, I make all remaining edits until we publish. Now, shout out to all of you who love DITA. I love DITA. But pretty much all the jobs out there now use Docs as code. So it's worth getting comfortable with the process. Now, similarly, Figma is an online design tool that allows us to collaborate with the design team in real time. They've created a graphics library specifically for our docs. We can copy and modify the graphics they've already created, and we can request new graphics as needed. When we want to make major modifications, we can do them to ourselves rather than submit a work order. Cultivating a great working relationship with our graphics team allows us the flexibility of asking for help or helping ourselves. GIMP, the new image manipulation program, is full-featured and easy to use. It's free, my favorite price point. It has much more functionality than I need. It's great for cleaning up screenshots. I typically draw in black and white, but then I'll colorize the images using GIMP. Now, the first animation software I ever used was Slideshow Magician, nigh on 40 yarn ago. It let you add a stack of bitmap images and put a transition between each. That was back when computers ran on diesel, some of you might remember. But I was able to use it in some creative ways, even back then, to create some interesting presentations. Today, of course, most of us have access to either PowerPoint or Keynote, and everyone can use Google Slides. But just because you can use PowerPoint, be sure that you're using it for good rather than evil. Please, for the sanity of your audience, do not put a bunch of words on the screen and then bring them to life by reading them aloud. This is a phenomenon known as death by PowerPoint. TED Talks average 14 words in the entire slide deck. Wherever possible, use graphics, not words, and remember, slides are free. We're not printing out hard copy books. Whether it's a live presentation or a recorded slideshow, change the slides often. Ideally, every 20 seconds or every 3 sentences. It helps to keep the audience engaged. Use animations thoughtfully to enhance, not distract. So one good reason to use animations, as we already saw, is to illustrate background processes that are invisible to the user. There we go. Depending on the slide software, there are a variety of fun effects, though. You can use these for both engagement and improved clarity. You don't have to invest in high-end video software to get your point across. Now, for screen capture, I just use Snagit, no Camtasia. This can either be the screenshot for an inline graphic or a short video demonstrating the user interface. I can either record the voiceover as I go, or I can wait and record it in the editing software. And the editing software I use is Wondershare Filmora. It's an inexpensive, basic video editing program, kind of like iMovie, but it's cross-platform and maybe has a few more bells and whistles. You don't need Adobe After Effects. If you've got the time and money, that's great. But production value isn't as important as cranking out effective videos quickly and on the cheap. I've used Adobe products. I used to teach classes in Photoshop and Illustrator back in the 90s, but even then they were pretty much overkill for anything I needed to do as a technical writer. Now here's an example of a video roll-in that precedes the UI demonstration. It adds a touch of fun before getting down to the serious business of the topic at hand. I should mention a couple of things. I was the first person to ask, do we really want the mascot of our docks to be old Weirdbeard in a fedora? And the design team said, yeah, we like it. Design team's fault. You might also wonder why I start every video with, my name is Dennis Dawson, or hi, I'm Dennis Dawson. Well, that's ego-driven personal branding. If other writers make videos, I want them to do the same thing, but I want everyone to know which are the Dennis videos, so they can follow me as I move between jobs throughout my career. Now, a bit of fun, I'm sorry, let's go ahead and show the video first, then I'll say that.
Hi, I'm Dennis Dawson. Let's create a time-based escrow payment. An escrow sets aside an amount of XRP for a specified period of time. There's a finish date, after which the funds are available to the recipient, and a cancel date when the funds are no longer available. Suppose I order escargot from Bordeaux. Before they slowly hunt down the little guys, pack them in a terrarium, and ship them across the Atlantic, they might want a Bordeaux escargot cargo escrow to ensure that the funds are committed before they ship. The escrow would allow time for the shipment to arrive and be verified before the funds are released to Bordeaux escargotonthego.co.
Now, it's a little bit of fun, but I did explain in 30 seconds what an escrow is for people who aren't familiar with it. So I encourage you to enliven your docs with a little bit of fun. Don't put the funny stuff while you're trying to teach the important stuff all the way through. But fun at the beginning, fun at the end, fun for everybody. Now, once we made these significant changes, we needed to ensure that everyone actually had the desired impact. There are 3 types of testing I can employ based on the available resources and budget. At shows and meetups, other opportunities, you can just talk to your customers. Now, our customers talked about how good our documentation was. We got some helpful feedback, but we only heard from people who liked our documentation. We didn't hear from anybody who couldn't engage with it. So you can have coworkers review the docs if you have no budget. Share them with people outside your direct organization, ask them for useful feedback. But have them try to do real tasks, not just read the docs. You remember that smart form designer, the one that gave me the headache? Well, we didn't just play with it. We had specific business problems we were trying to solve. Other testers played with it and quit when their heads hurt and said it's great. So that's why you have to have them do something real. And don't settle for superlatives. If someone says it's great, ask them why they think it's great. If they say it sucks, ask them why it sucks. But be careful not to lead the witness, as they say in court. Give them a task and watch them struggle through. Fight the urge to help them out or give them too many hints. You want to see how well they can do with the documentation on their own. Now, if you have a budget, for corn's sake, bring in a testing consultant to help you define and administer the testing. I was in awe of how skillfully our consultant guided the participants so they didn't get stuck, but largely allowed them to figure things out on their own. We writers were able to silently observe while the volunteers worked with the docs to find information. Now, importantly, at the end of the process, we got a full objective report of what was working and what needed more attention. The consultant recruited participants with a variety of experience and background from all over the world. Hugely, after working on these changes for over a year, our customers immediately appreciated the new look. They also validated the changes where we embedded graphics and video as being an important direction as we continue to implement the new format. Of course, they found some issues that really needed improvement. One participant gave a detailed description of what he was looking for, high-level explanations with sample code and video demos. I was cringing because he perfectly described all the changes I'd been working on. All he had to do was spin a triangle. Spin the triangle. It's right there in the navigation bar. He never found the triangle, which, of course, told us where we needed to work on our user interface. Now, some of the criticisms actually gave support for changes we still wanted to make. I wanted my new tutorials, because I have a huge ego, to be the top level link. But there was resistance from my coworkers who had written the previous tutorials. The UI testing verified that they needed to be more prominent. Yes. So having an independent professional UI consultant evaluate our site gave us specific evidence that what we were doing was working well. It was no longer just my opinion that the illustrations were fun and engaging. We had empirical evidence that the changes were having the desired effect. That's a great thing to be able to show upper management when you want to continue to do these things and, I don't know, have a job. So, let me finish with a few tips I've picked up over the past 4 decades. No one ever said these docs are informative, but I wish they were more dull. It is perfectly all right to write documentation that's both edifying and delightful. Choose carefully. Reference docs should be concise and straightforward. Conceptual documentation benefits from periodic breaks that allow the reader to absorb what's been said. A lighter touch can make them more engaging. Your customers might actually read what they would normally skim. Anyone who's concerned that delightful docs aren't professional is behind the times. Wherever you can, simplify your language. We're not writing for academia, so there's no reason to tart up the language with sesquipedalian phraseology. Einstein is often quoted as saying, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself. When you document APIs in particular, don't just say the Hublat has a range from 1 to 5,000 and the default is 100. Well, what happens if you turn it up to 5,000? What happens if you turn it down to 1? If there's a variable, then it has a value range, and there should be a rationale for setting the value. Tell me why I should change it, not just the options. Please don't try to be funny. Sometimes I'm funny, sometimes I'm not, but I don't force it. It either works or it doesn't. And don't try to sound smart. Sometimes I'll catch someone using a great deal of jargon, speaking in long sentences, and vaguely circling the crux of the information I'm seeking. In college, we used to call that ing fishing, where someone is just kind of riffing in the hopes that something will sound right. But really smart people explain things in a way that's easy for everyone to understand. Your goal isn't to sound smart, but to make your reader feel smart because they understand the concept you're trying to convey. You want to write in such a way that your reader gets to the bottom of the page before they decide whether to read it. If your prose flows smoothly in short, easy-to-grok sentences, they're much more likely to stick with the material. When my wife used to cook a roast, she would often trim off the end. And I asked her why she did it. She said her mother taught her. I asked her mother, why did you do it? She says, oh, my grandmother taught me to cut off the end of the roast. I asked grandmother, why do you cut off the end of the roast? She said, my pan is only this wide. So when I first started teaching people how to use the Macintosh, I said, the indent is 1/2 inch. This is how you set it. And someone said, no, it's 5 spaces. I said, do you know why? Because that's the rule. I said, no, your typewriter works in 10 pitch. That's 10 characters per inch. So 5 spaces is 1/2 inch. But on the Macintosh, you don't have to do the math. You see? So question everything. Don't just accept rules that are handed to you. And after you answer the questions, question them again. Remember, your docs are never finished. They're merely shipped. So you can always make improvements all along the way. Push the envelope, have a voice, be willing to be different, and provide a better experience. Question everything, then question your answers again. Have fun so others can have fun as well. And this is where you can see my Wix site, or you can contact me at DennisSDawson@gmail.com, and it must be time for questions. Oh, do I have to walk all the way over there? I'm like, oh, I thought, no, I'll get there. No, it's fine.
I had to carry the chair, so. Thank you so much, Dennis. That was such a fun and informative talk, I think, about not just creating graphics, but also the psychology of what goes into how people perceive them, and that's really cool to see. I don't think my mic is on, if anyone. Yeah, I think he did. I can project.
Can you hand that to me real quick? I'm sorry for that.
Doing it live.
She was just congratulating for learning what Caitlin Davey taught me last year.
Okay, we've got a couple questions about how you create your graphics for different audiences. So people who might speak different languages or come from different cultures where maybe some of the symbols you might use might not be interpreted the same way by different people. So how do you make it so that the graphics that you make are usable for as big an audience as possible?
Honestly, a lot of trial and error.
Yeah.
I love puns, of course.
Me too.
And they only work in English and only in American English, for goodness sake. So sometimes I will err. And fortunately, I have a very diverse workplace and people who are not shy to tell me when I'm being exclusive.
That's great. That's great. Could you walk through your experience working with design teams, if there's anything that you found that worked particularly well or what you would change moving forward?
Working with a design team, you can think of it as improvisational theater. So anything they suggest, well, this is true working with anybody. Use the yes and principle. If they tell you that something looks better, if it's going to be more in line with corporate guidelines, just my theory of life, 25% of the time, I'm absolutely right, and I'm going to stick to my guns. 25% of the time, I'm absolutely wrong, and I change my mind immediately. And then there's this 50% in the middle. And your life is a lot easier if you always let that 50% go the other way. So if somebody makes a suggestion and it's not something that you would do, let them have a little ownership, because people help support the things they help to create. And that's the secret of working with a design team.
That sounds like just good life advice in general.
I'm so wise.
And humble too, it's great. For anybody who watched your talk and said, yes, this is exactly what I want to do, I am so inspired, thank you, Santa. Any recommended places like tutorials or references? I know that you had some books there, but what would you recommend to help somebody get started?
All right. It depends on what you mean by getting started. If you want to get started with using visuals, great book is the Sketchnoting Handbook by Mike Rohde. If you want to get started drawing, I recommend that you immediately go to the children's section of the library, because they're not going to say, here's a sphere and here's a cone. They're going to say, let's draw a spaceship, and it's going to go around this planet, and it's going to be cool. So go after Mark Kistler. Or you can start with Ed Emberley, who does very simple icon types of drawings that you can immediately put into use in your technical documentation. We just have to know it's supposed to be a horse. It doesn't have to look like my friend Flicka.
And then from there, how do you develop your own style?
Style comes from doing it.
Yeah.
And so just do it.
Yeah.
And if you copy somebody's artistic style, that's called how every artist has ever learned in the history of mankind. So don't feel bad if you happen to have a flair for drawing like someone you admire. That's how they learned. They copied somebody they admired.
So next year, all of our talks are going to have little drawings like yours?
Absolutely, because you all admire me now.
Yeah. It's the hat.
It's the hat. There's a reason for this. Yeah, I don't actually wake up in the morning and say, what will I wear today? I have 21 black t-shirts, several pairs of blue jeans. Sometimes I wear black jeans, I admit it. But I've got a uniform, and it saves me time every day.
It's not the elephant butt costume anymore? Those days are over?
That was in 1978 that I did that. And full disclosure, because I do have an ego, I was promoted to front end of the elephant before the end of the first parade. Thank you. Thank you.
Now we admire you even more. It can be done. The 70s are coming back anyway, so
That's right.
That's what I hear. What are your favorite ways to make graphics accessible? So for people who might not be able to see your illustrations, how do you make sure that people can have sort of an equivalent experience?
It is important for every graphic that you put in to have a full description of it. And sometimes, it's not just saying it's an elephant. It's sitting there, and the elephant is standing on its hind legs and it's balancing a ball at the end of its trunk. You describe the entire image and not just what it is.
Yeah, you have to get across the meaning of the image, right?
Thank you.
Not just the fact that it's there. Yeah, and which end of the elephant it is. Yeah, yeah, perfect. And we have somebody who is asking you to repeat a phrase. You said, "Don't fish in the hope that something will sound right." You called it something fishing. Could you remind them what it was?
Ingfish. Ingfish is the language you're using, and when you use it, you're ingfishing. So you'll have somebody. I used to have one particular developer who would always give me half the answer to what I was looking for. And the reason is that he wanted me to come back afterward and ask for clarification because he really enjoyed talking down to me at that point. As I gained experience with the product, I was able to see through what he was saying many times, and that's when he turned to the Ingfish. And I would just always say, this is fascinating, but I have trouble understanding this. You understand, I'm the lowest common denominator in the company. You explain something to me, I can explain it to anybody, but you have to make it clear to me. And as we say, Einstein is quoted as saying, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old or Dennis, then you don't understand it well yourself.
That's great. And one last question. We've only got 2 minutes, but from somebody who was wondering what Doxa's code is in 2 or 3 sentences, could you give an overview?
It's an aberration.
I think I might have accidentally made you make some enemies here.
No. I've been working in Doxa's code for 5 years now. I did love DITA, worked in DITA for 20 plus years. Doxa's code is writing if engineers were tech writers. And it is really amazing, and it works very well hierarchically. When you've got nice templates and somebody is actually taking care of all of the look. Personally, I do not get involved with the CSS. I can write CSS, I can do CSS. I don't enjoy CSS. So there are people who are going to enjoy putting together the templates that take your raw code, and that's really all it is. We're talking about MarkDoc. It's really mostly just plain paragraphs with certain special markers that you have to use. And then with a nice CSS template, it turns into something beautiful. But if I had to spend my time actually writing the CSS and doing all the workflow necessary to have it run, I would go back to being the rear end of an elephant at Disneyland.
I'm sure it's still in you. One last question. We've only got a minute left for Q&A, but in a product under development, things obviously change. Is it best to do graphics and especially video later? When do you get started with that?
One of the nice things about the videos that I create, I can script, record, and publish typically in about 4 hours. If I'm lazy and I think that I can get away with it. Otherwise, I would do it faster. This is why I say you don't need Adobe After Effects. Really, what I'm doing is recording a narrated PowerPoint presentation, and you can just pop those right out. So I actually, many times with documentation and with videos, can have an influence over the final UI. If I say, this is how it works, and they look at it, and that's not how it works. Well, it's how it works for me. And then they go back and look, wow, Dennis is really stupid. He needs more buttons. And they fix it up from that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dennis. Your answers were just as good as your talk, and that was a high bar to clear.
Oh, wow. I wish I had a tie. I'd straighten it.
No, you just got to tip your hat. Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. We're going to take a quick break. Round of applause for Dennis.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.